They thought it was a joke when the Baron gave her away, but Ethan Cole didn't laugh. The Hall of House Vale stretched nearly 100 yards from end to end, its vaulted ceiling shimmering like liquid mercury, light bending across alien alloys that hummed at a frequency just below human hearing. Diplomats stood in crescent rows, their robes threaded with faint bioluminescent veins, their eyes reflecting the pale blue glow of the suspended gravity dais at the center of the chamber. On that dais lay Lyra Vale, daughter of Baron Kaler Vale, her silver-blue skin faintly luminous, her lower body encased in a restraint field so subtle it looked like mist. She did not move, not when her father gestured toward her as if presenting surplus cargo, not when a ripple of restrained amusement passed through the court. Ethan stood alone at the base of the dais, 6'2", broad-shouldered in a simple charcoal utility suit, the fabric still creased from long-haul travel. He had been summoned as a xenobiological consultant, nothing more. A contractor from Earth. A man who measured life in heartbeats per minute and oxygen saturation percentages. The Baron's voice carried easily across the chamber, smooth as polished stone. A gesture of goodwill, he said, one elegant hand extended toward his daughter. A human once told me your species values compassion. Consider this an opportunity to demonstrate it. A faint shimmer pulsed along Lyra's skin at the word opportunity. Ethan noticed. He stepped closer to the dais. The air temperature dropped by at least 5 degrees Fahrenheit within the field's perimeter, calibrated to her physiology. He could see the microtremors beneath her clavicle, the irregular rhythm of breath not quite synchronized with the field's modulation cycle. Not lifeless, not broken, just held. Does she feel pain? Ethan asked quietly. The question did not echo. It settled. The court grew still. The Baron's eyes narrowed, the faint golden flecks within them brightening. She feels what remains useful, he replied. A thin smile. Controlled. Calculated. Ethan didn't look at him. He looked at Lyra. Her eyes were open, translucent, faceted like cut crystal, reflecting the hall's light in fractured constellations. Intelligent. Alert. Humiliated. The gravity dais hovered 3 feet above the floor. Ethan placed his hand against its edge. The metal was warm, conducting energy through layered superconductive filaments. He felt the vibration pattern, steady, intentional, not medical, administrative, a containment frequency. He glanced at the control node embedded in the platform's spine. A neural governor. Military grade. He had seen something similar once in a restricted Terran research file. Technology designed not to heal paralysis, but to enforce it. A murmur passed through the chamber as Ethan circled the dais, studying the faint lattice of light encasing Lyra's lower body. Her fingers twitched, barely a quarter inch. The movement was so small most wouldn't have noticed. Ethan did. He saw the signal spike across the restraint field surface, the system correcting, suppressing. This wasn't injury. It was inhibition. He looked up finally, meeting the Baron's gaze. No accusation. No outrage. Just assessment. I'll need a controlled lab environment, Ethan said evenly, and full access to her neural interface. A pause. Long enough for politics to breathe. The Baron tilted his head, as if amused by an insect attempting strategy. She is yours to manage, human. Do with her what you believe your kind does best. Laughter, softer this time, like wind through glass chimes. Ethan ignored it. He stepped closer to Lyra, lowering his voice so only she could hear. If you can understand me, he said, blink once. Her bioluminescence flickered, then steadied. A single blink. Slow. Deliberate. In that blink was something the entire Empire had chosen not to see. Not weakness. Not defect. Potential. Ethan straightened, the weight of 100 alien stares pressing against his back. They thought he had been handed a burden. A punchline. A living reminder of imperfection. But as the gravity dais began to descend toward transport level and the containment field adjusted with a faint harmonic sigh, Ethan Cole felt something else entirely, like the quiet before a breakthrough, like the first data point in a pattern no one else had bothered to chart. They believed they had given him a joke. They had just given him a choice. The transport corridor to Ethan Cole's assigned lab stretched nearly half a mile beneath the Vale estate. Its walls curved in seamless arcs of pale alloy that reflected Lyra's faint silver-blue glow in distorted echoes. The gravity dais hovered silently beside him as he walked, its field generators emitting a low harmonic tone that vibrated lightly through the soles of his boots. The air smelled sterile, ionized, controlled to within 1/10 of a degree. 68 degrees Fahrenheit, he estimated. Cooler than human comfort. Optimal for her species. He kept his pace steady. Not rushed. Not ceremonial. Lyra lay motionless within the field, but her eyes tracked everything. The corridor lights brightened automatically as they passed, then dimmed behind them, as if the estate itself were observing. Ethan reached the lab chamber assigned to him, a circular room roughly 40 feet in diameter, ceiling inset, with adjustable spectrum panels calibrated for multi-species biology. He keyed the access node, and the door sealed with a soft magnetic sigh. The outside world disappeared. No court. No laughter. Just the hum of equipment and the faint rhythm of two different species breathing in the same air. He moved immediately to the dais control interface, projecting a holographic lattice above his wrist console. Lines of alien code scrolled in layered geometries, elegant and precise. He recognized the architecture. Neural suppression array. Multi-point anchoring across the spinal column equivalent. Not damage. Interruption. He glanced at her. "I am going to lower the field intensity by 5%, he said evenly. "If it causes distress, signal with your eyes." Her gaze held steady. He adjusted the control. The harmonic pitch shifted, dropping half a tone. For a moment nothing changed. Then a tremor traveled along her right hand. Less than an inch. The field pulsed in response, attempting correction. Ethan countered manually, isolating the feedback loop. Sweat gathered at the base of his neck despite the cool air. The system was designed to override voluntary neural firing. Someone had calibrated it with care. Someone who understood her anatomy intimately. "You are not paralyzed," he said quietly, more to the data than to her. "You are being held." Her bioluminescence flickered, brighter now, a faint ripple traveling from her collarbone to her jawline. Emotional spike. Relief. Fear. Both registered similarly across alien physiology charts he had studied on the long flight from Earth. He reduced the suppression another 2%. This time her fingers curled deliberately, knuckles tightening against the invisible resistance. The motion lasted less than a second before the system attempted to compensate. Ethan severed the auto-correction routine and rerouted it into a diagnostic buffer. The room filled with a sharper mechanical hum as the array struggled to reconcile conflicting commands. Lyra inhaled sharply, the first uncontrolled breath he had heard from her. It sounded fragile. Human. "It will hurt," he said, voice low and steady. "Because your body remembers what it was allowed to forget." Her eyes shifted to him fully now. Not as cargo. Not as property. As a variable. As possibility. He lowered the field another fraction. This time the tremor reached her forearm. Muscles awakening beneath silver-blue skin, faint light pulsing brighter with each signal that slipped past the governor. The data confirmed what his instincts already knew. There was nothing wrong with her nerves. Nothing missing. Only imposed silence. Ethan leaned closer to the console, isolating the command signature embedded deep within the suppression matrix. It carried a biometric seal. House Veil authorization. Not medical necessity. Administrative decree. He exhaled slowly. In the quiet lab, with the estate sealed away behind layers of alloy and protocol, the truth settled between them like a third presence. She had not been abandoned because she was broken. She had been contained because she was not. He met her gaze again. "We are going to test something," he said. "And this time, you will move because you choose to." The field dropped another fraction of a percent, and the sound inside the lab changed. Not louder but sharper, like thin ice under pressure, and Lyra's entire body reacted as if a current had passed through it. Her back arching slightly against the restraint lattice, silver blue light flaring along the delicate lines beneath her skin. Ethan did not touch her. He did not rush forward. He only watched the neural readouts cascade across his display in precise columns of data measured in microvolts and milliseconds, because this was not about heroics. It was about control returning to its rightful owner. "Slow," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, and he stabilized the governor at 42% suppression, low enough to allow signal bleed, high enough to prevent systemic shock. Lyra's jaw tightened, the first visible strain he had seen from her. and then her right hand lifted nearly 2 inches off the surface of the dais before trembling violently and dropping back into the containment field. The lab filled with the sound of her breathing, uneven now, no longer perfectly synchronized with the artificial modulation cycle. It was messy, organic, real. Ethan swallowed, adjusting the environmental controls up by 2 degrees Fahrenheit to compensate for metabolic increase, and rerouted power from the secondary analysis ring to reinforce the localized neural bridge he had improvised. He was not dismantling the system yet, only teaching it to loosen its grip. Her eyes locked onto his, facets bright and searching, and for the first time there was no humiliation in them, only calculation. She was measuring him the way he measured data. "You were trained," he said, scanning the muscle density readings returning from her lower body, which now showed faint but undeniable activation patterns. "This is not random motor noise. This is discipline." A faint pulse of light moved across her throat in response, a subtle glow that his translation database suggested correlated with affirmation. He nodded once, accepting it. He reduced suppression by another single %. This time the movement traveled farther, from shoulder to elbow to wrist in a controlled sequence, imperfect but intentional. The containment field reacted, attempting to reassert dominance, and Ethan manually overrode the corrective surge with a steady hand, his fingers moving across the console in practiced arcs. Outside the sealed lab doors, he knew the estate's monitoring systems would be registering fluctuations. House Vale did not design technology without layers of observation. He had perhaps minutes before someone questioned the variance. Lyra's left leg twitched, barely a half-inch, but the readout confirmed full neural transmission reaching muscle fibers that had been silent for months, perhaps longer. The truth settled deeper now, heavy and undeniable. She had not been spared from duty because she was weak. She had been restrained because she was formidable. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves could listen. "If you can move on your own," he said, "then this is not my experiment. It is yours." He deactivated one final micro-lock embedded at the base of the suppression code, a subtle command signature bearing the biometric imprint of Baron Kaler Vale. The moment it dissolved, Lyra's bioluminescence surged in a brilliant wave that washed across the lab in pale blue light, and both of her hands rose from the dais, shaking but unmistakably free within the thinning field. She held them there, suspended in defiance of the invisible restraint, breath unsteady yet determined, and in that fragile elevation of trembling fingers was something the Empire had tried to bury beneath protocol and pride. Not rebellion, not vengeance, but capacity. Ethan felt the monitoring grid outside spike in response, distant alarms beginning to whisper through encrypted channels, and he understood that what he had altered was more than a medical parameter. He had shifted a balance of power measured not in weapons or fleets, but in who was allowed to stand. Lyra's gaze did not leave his as she kept her hands raised, as if rediscovering gravity on her own terms, and in the sterile glow of alien machinery and human resolve, the first quiet act of reclamation began. The first alert arrived as a shift in the lights, not a sound, but a subtle recalibration of spectrum across the ceiling panels, the lab tint cooling by a fraction as the estate systems detected irregular neural output. Ethan saw it reflected in Lyra's eyes before he saw it on his console, a faint amber pulse in the corner of his display indicating supervisory inquiry from House Vale's central oversight. He did not look toward the sealed doors. He did not reach to restore the suppression to its original setting. Instead, he stabilized the field at 38% and rerouted the external monitoring feed through a diagnostic mirror, feeding the estate a steady stream of controlled but incomplete data. "They are watching," he said quietly. Lyra's hands were still suspended, trembling but obedient to her will, and slowly, deliberately, she lowered them to the surface of the dais without surrendering control. It was not collapse, it was choice. Her breathing began to regulate, deep and measured, each inhale expanding her rib cage against the faint shimmer of the containment lattice. Ethan adjusted the room temperature down 1 degree to counter the metabolic spike and activated a secondary hollow display, projecting a 3-dimensional map of her neural pathways above them. Luminous threads of light pulsed in branching arcs, some bright and free, others dim, where the governor still pressed like an unseen thumb. You will need endurance, he said, keeping his tone even, clinical, respectful. This will not be one dramatic moment. It will be inches. Repetition. Control. Her gaze flicked to the neural map, then back to him, and a faint ripple of bioluminescence traced along her jawline. Steadier now, less chaotic. She understood process. Outside the lab, footsteps passed in the corridor, measured and precise. Guards maintaining protocol rather than urgency. No one burst through the doors. No command overrode his access. Not yet. Ethan initiated a controlled test, sending a low-intensity stimulus through the modified interface, encouraging signal flow without forcing it. Lyra's left foot shifted beneath the field, less than half an inch, but this time it did not snap back immediately. The suppression matrix hesitated, its corrective algorithm confused by the altered parameters. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction settle in his chest, not triumph, not defiance, just confirmation. The system was built to silence extremes, not persistence. Again, he said softly. She closed her eyes for a brief second, gathering focus, and when she opened them the light within had changed, not brighter, but sharper, like a star seen through clear winter air. Her leg moved again, this time a full inch, muscles tightening in coordinated sequence that matched the training patterns stored in her file. She was not relearning how to move. She was remembering. The amber alert on his console shifted to a steady glow, meaning the variance had been noted but not yet escalated. Ethan knew that window would close soon. He reduced suppression by another 0.5%, careful, incremental, and the field's hum deepened as it recalibrated. Lyra's hands gripped the edge of the dais, silver-blue fingers curling with intention, and she pushed her shoulders upward, lifting her torso nearly 3 inches before settling back with controlled restraint. No panic, no collapse. Just effort measured and contained. Ethan stepped closer, not to hold her, but to stand within her line of sight. They believed stillness meant safety, he said quietly. They did not account for patience. Her eyes held his, steady and calculating, and in the reflection of the lab's cold light he saw not a discarded heir, not a political inconvenience, but a strategist evaluating timing. Beyond the alloy walls, the estate remained calm, dignified, unaware that within this sealed circle of metal and light, the balance was shifting not with noise, but with repetition, not with rebellion, but with the simple, relentless act of a daughter choosing to move again. The lab settled into a rhythm that felt almost human, the steady hum of the containment field blending with the soft cadence of Lyra's breathing as Ethan calibrated the suppression down to 35%, careful not to trigger a full estate override. Outside the sealed doors, activity remained orderly, footsteps measured, voices distant and controlled, the Empire confident in its systems, unaware that control was no longer absolute. Lyra shifted again, this time rotating her shoulder with deliberate precision, testing the edge of resistance rather than colliding with it. Her silver-blue skin glowed in slow pulses, not erratic now, but synchronized with effort, like a metronome set by will instead of machinery. Ethan watched the neural map hover between them, lines of light brightening along pathways that had been muted for months, perhaps longer, and he adjusted the gain on the interface so her own signals displayed more prominently than the governor's interference. You do not need to overpower it, he said quietly. You only need to outlast it. Her gaze narrowed slightly, analytical, and she began to move in smaller increments, isolating muscle groups one at a time. Her right hand lifted an inch, held, lowered with control. Then her left followed, the tremor decreasing with each repetition. Sweat formed along her temples, catching the lab's cool light, and Ethan increased airflow by a subtle margin to prevent overheating. He did not reach to wipe it away, did not intrude, because this was not rescue. It was restoration. A soft chime flickered across his console, a priority request from House Vale administration seeking status confirmation. Ethan routed a simplified progress report through the mirror feed, careful to frame the data as standard diagnostic fluctuation within acceptable parameters. The amber alert faded to a neutral white. For now, Lyra's lower body responded next, her thigh muscles engaging in a coordinated contraction that lifted her knee nearly 3 inches before settling back. The containment lattice shimmered but did not fully correct, its algorithm increasingly uncertain. She opened her eyes wider, focusing not on the ceiling but on the neural projection, studying the pathways as if memorizing a battlefield map. They assumed stillness would become identity. Ethan said, voice low and steady. It does not. Her bioluminescence brightened in a smooth wave across her collarbone, no longer flickering in distress, but stabilizing in concentration. She shifted her weight again, pushing her torso upright with both arms until she was seated at a slight angle within the thinning field, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The movement was not dramatic. It was incremental, and that was what made it powerful. Ethan stepped back half a pace, giving her space within the circle of light, hands hovering near the console but not intervening. Outside the lab, the estate's monitoring systems continued their quiet surveillance, confident in hierarchy, in signatures, in seals of authority. Inside, a different authority was emerging, not declared, not broadcast, but built 1 inch at a time. Lyra exhaled slowly, then flexed her feet again, this time holding the contraction for a full 3 seconds before releasing. The neural map flared bright along both pathways, clean and unobstructed. She was not straining blindly now. She was training. Ethan felt the shift in the room, subtle yet undeniable, like pressure equalizing after a long imbalance. She was no longer testing whether she could move. She was deciding how far. And in the sterile glow of alloy walls and humming circuits, the first signs of strategy replaced survival, as a daughter once displayed as an object began to reclaim herself not through spectacle, but through discipline. The lab lights dimmed by a fraction as the estate shifted into evening cycle, a subtle transition from bright white to a cooler blue spectrum that cast long metallic shadows across the curved walls, and Ethan felt the passage of time not in hours, but in the steadiness of Lyra's movements. She no longer trembled with every lift, no longer reacted to each resistance spike as if it were a surprise. Suppression remained at 32%, low enough to allow sustained control, high enough to avoid triggering a full command recall from House Vale. Ethan monitored the estate's oversight channel through his mirrored feed, watching for anomalies in data requests, and for the first time since he arrived, the alerts had grown infrequent. They believed the fluctuations were stabilizing. In a way, they were. Lyra shifted her weight forward, hands braced against the edge of the dais, and pushed herself upright into a seated position without assistance. The containment lattice shimmered, but did not force her down. Her silver-blue skin glowed evenly now, light tracing along her arms and spine in controlled pulses that matched her breathing. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled, holding her posture for a full 5 seconds before easing back an inch. Ethan adjusted the neural projection, enlarging the lower pathway map, so she could see the signals reaching her legs. The lines burned brighter than before, clean arcs of intent moving through muscle memory that had never truly vanished. "You are stronger than the system anticipated," he said quietly. Her eyes flicked toward him, thoughtful rather than reactive, and then she did something different. Instead of pushing against the field, she relaxed into it. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing slowed, and the neural signals softened deliberately. The suppression matrix responded by decreasing corrective output, misreading the calm as compliance. Ethan saw the pattern immediately. She was studying the governor, learning its habits. After several steady breaths, she moved again, this time in a sudden but controlled lift of both legs nearly 4 inches off the dais. The field lagged by a measurable fraction of a second before attempting to compensate, and by then the movement had completed. She lowered her legs with precision, eyes steady, calculating. This was no longer rehabilitation. It was strategy. Ethan felt a quiet respect settle in his chest, not admiration born of surprise, but recognition of intellect meeting opportunity. He accessed a secondary panel and began drafting a skeletal framework for an adaptive exoskeletal support system, one calibrated to her species' biomechanics and neural cadence. Lightweight alloy, responsive servomotors, calibrated in pounds rather than arbitrary imperial metrics, designed not to carry her, but to amplify her. He did not mention it yet. Outside the lab, the estate corridors remained silent, unaware that within this controlled environment, a daughter once displayed as proof of limitation was mapping the architecture of her own restraint. Lyra shifted again, sliding one foot closer to the edge of the dais until her heel hovered just beyond the strongest containment node. She looked at Ethan, and in that look was not a plea, not gratitude, but a question of timing. He met her gaze and gave the smallest nod. She pressed downward. Her foot touched the solid alloy floor for the first time in months, perhaps longer, and though the containment lattice shimmered violently around her lower body, it did not fully reclaim her stance. The contact lasted only a second before she lifted it again, but the room felt different afterward, as if gravity itself had been renegotiated. In the quiet hum of alien machinery and human patience, Lyra Vale was no longer learning whether she could move. She was learning when to stand. The moment her foot touched the floor, the estate noticed. Not with shouting, not with intrusion, with silence. The monitoring channel on Ethan's console shifted from neutral white to a steady, watchful blue, indicating direct oversight from House Vale's central authority, not a guard, not an assistant. Him. The air in the lab felt thinner, though the oxygen levels remained constant. 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Stable pressure. Only the awareness had changed. Lyra felt it too. Her bioluminescence dimmed slightly, not in fear but in calculation, as if conserving energy for something more important than defiance. Ethan did not raise the suppression back up. He did not step between her and the door. He simply adjusted the containment lattice to distribute resistance evenly rather than concentrated at her spine. If the Baron was watching, he would see measured rehabilitation, controlled progress. Nothing explosive. Lyra lowered her foot again, this time placing it flat against the alloy floor for a full 2 seconds. The field shimmered intensely, attempting to reassert the original constraint, and Ethan's console flashed with an automated correction request requiring House Vale authorization to maintain prior restriction levels. He let the request hang unanswered. He did not override it. He did not confirm it. He simply continued feeding real-time neural metrics into the diagnostic buffer, forcing the system to process her movement as therapeutic variance rather than rebellion. Lyra shifted her weight carefully, pushing through her arms and bringing her second foot down beside the first. Her legs trembled visibly now, muscles long restrained rediscovering load-bearing alignment. But she did not collapse. She stood suspended within thinning light, not fully free, not fully contained. A message pulsed across Ethan's screen in formal Vale script requesting verbal confirmation of treatment objectives. He exhaled slowly, then spoke aloud, voice steady and professional. Subject demonstrates progressive motor recovery under calibrated supervision. Suppression reduction remains within safe tolerance thresholds. The message paused, then cleared. The oversight channel remained open. Lyra's eyes lifted toward the sealed doors, as if she could see through metal and data into the heart of the estate. Her chin rose a fraction of an inch. Not challenge. Presence. Ethan reduced suppression by another 0.5%, the smallest adjustment yet. And this time when she straightened, the containment field did not flare violently. It adapted. Her spine aligned, shoulders squared, both feet firmly planted on the alloy surface. She was standing, not gracefully, not effortlessly, but undeniably upright. The room felt different at that height, the neural projection casting light across her face rather than above it. Ethan stepped back 2 paces, giving her space, hands lowered at his sides. He would not hold her unless she asked. Outside the lab, the estate systems continued to observe, recording data, analyzing deviations, but no command came to halt the process. No order to restore full suppression. Perhaps the Baron was waiting. Perhaps he was calculating the same way his daughter was. Lyra took one tentative step forward, barely 6 inches, her movement controlled and deliberate. The containment lattice shimmered, but did not drag her down. The second step followed, steadier than the first. Ethan watched the neural map flare bright, with unbroken signal flow, clean and intentional. In that quiet laboratory, under the silent gaze of an empire built on hierarchy, a daughter once displayed as limitation moved forward not in defiance, not in spectacle, but in measured, undeniable progress. And somewhere beyond the alloy walls, a father who had believed stillness meant control was beginning to understand that restraint, once studied, becomes predictable. The lab doors opened without warning, not with force but with authority, their alloy panels sliding apart in absolute silence as Baron Kaler Vale stepped inside accompanied by two silent attendants who remained at the threshold. He did not rush, did not display anger, only composed precision, his tall frame draped in dark ceremonial fabric threaded with faint gold light that echoed in his eyes. The containment lattice shimmered faintly around Lyra as she stood nearly upright at the center of the room, her silver-blue skin glowing steadily, her posture no longer tentative but aligned. Ethan felt the oversight channel on his console shift from passive observation to direct control access. Suppression levels flickered as the Baron's biometric signature engaged with the system. For a fraction of a second, the lattice tightened, a visible pulse along Lyra's spine, testing whether it still owned her balance. She did not fall. Her legs trembled, but she adjusted her stance by half an inch, redistributing weight with controlled precision the way a strategist adjusts a formation rather than abandoning it. Ethan did not reach for the console. He did not block the Baron's access. He simply spoke in the same steady tone he had used since the beginning. Motor function is returning within projected parameters. The Baron's gaze shifted from Ethan to his daughter, studying the angle of her shoulders, the placement of her feet on the alloy floor. "You exceeded projected parameters," he said quietly, his voice smooth but carrying a depth that filled the circular chamber. Lyra met his eyes without lowering her chin. No accusation, no plea, only clarity. The containment field pulsed again as the Baron initiated a remote diagnostic. Data streamed across Ethan's display, showing the original suppression architecture, the deliberate locks embedded months ago, the command seal bearing House Vale authority. The truth was no longer theoretical. It glowed in measurable code between them. "You were never damaged," the Baron said, not to Ethan, but to Lyra. It was not an apology. It was recognition. Lyra took one controlled step forward, closing the distance by 12 inches, and though the lattice shimmered intensely, it did not collapse her posture. "I was limited," she replied, her voice steady for the first time without strain. The sound of it in the lab carried weight beyond volume. It was the return of something intentionally muted. Ethan watched the neural map flare with clean, uninterrupted signals, and he understood the true conflict had never been muscle against machinery. It had been perception against potential. The Baron deactivated his remote override attempt, the containment field stabilizing at a neutral tolerance rather than tightening. He circled slowly, observing her stance from different angles, assessing not weakness but capability. "If you stand," he said at last, "you will be seen." Lyra's bioluminescence brightened subtly along her collarbone, not in fear, but in resolve. "Then let them see," she answered. The attendants at the doorway remained motionless, witnesses to a shift they could not quantify. Ethan stepped back another pace, removing himself from the center of the triangle that had formed between father, daughter, and system. He had not forced this confrontation. He had not dismantled the estate. He had adjusted percentages and allowed truth to surface. The Baron studied his daughter one final moment, then issued a quiet command that altered the suppression baseline from enforced limitation to monitored autonomy. The lattice did not vanish, but it loosened, no longer a cage, only a measure. Lyra stood fully upright without assistance, feet planted on cold alloy, shoulders squared beneath the soft blue light of the lab. In that silent room, beneath the watchful gaze of an empire built on control, the greatest shift was not that she could move. It was that she was no longer being hidden. The next morning the hall of House Vale filled again, not with laughter this time, but with expectation, the vaulted ceiling reflecting a softer spectrum of light as dignitaries gathered in silent rows beneath banners that shimmered like captured starlight. The gravity dais stood at the center of the chamber, deactivated, its containment lattice reduced to a faint outline like a memory rather than a cage. Ethan Cole remained near the edge of the assembly, hands clasped loosely behind his back, charcoal suit unadorned among garments woven with gold and living light. He did not stand as a savior, only as a witness. A low chime resonated through the hall as Baron Kaler Vale entered, measured and composed, and beside him walked Lyra Vale. Not carried, not suspended, walking. Her steps were deliberate, each one placed with careful alignment. The adaptive support framework Ethan had calibrated resting discreetly beneath her ceremonial attire, lightweight alloy responding to her neural cadence rather than dictating it. It did not move her. It amplified her. The court watched in absolute silence, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in muted surprise as she crossed nearly 30 feet of polished alloy floor without faltering. There was no spectacle in her movement, no dramatic flourish, only steady control built from repetition measured in inches and percentages. When she reached the center of the hall, she did not ascend the dais immediately. She turned instead to face the assembly at eye level. The gesture was subtle, but it shifted the geometry of power. She did not look down on them. She stood among them. The Baron regarded his daughter for a long moment, then inclined his head, a fraction of an inch, not theatrical, not exaggerated, but unmistakable. House Vale does not conceal strength, he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. It was not an admission of fault. It was a correction of policy. Lyra stepped onto the dais under her own control, the support system adjusting seamlessly as she rose the final 6 inches to its surface. The hall lights brightened, catching the silver-blue glow of her skin as it pulsed calmly, confidently. She surveyed the court with the steady gaze of someone who had studied silence long enough to understand its weight. Ethan remained at the perimeter, unseen by most, and that suited him. He monitored nothing now, no suppression percentages, no oversight channels. There was nothing left to override. Lyra spoke, her voice clear and even. Potential does not disappear when it is hidden, she said. It waits. The words were simple, free of accusation, free of triumph. They settled into the vast chamber like a quiet recalibration. Around her, the Empire adjusted, not through force, not through fear, but through recognition. Ethan felt the faint vibration of the hall beneath his boots, the subtle hum of systems recalibrating to a new baseline, and he allowed himself a single slow breath. He had not dismantled a dynasty. He had not delivered a speech. He had asked a question in a room full of certainty and listened to the answer in data and in silence. Lyra stood tall beneath the vaulted ceiling, no longer displayed as limitation, no longer contained as liability. The stars beyond the translucent dome reflected in her faceted eyes, steady and bright, and for the first time since Ethan arrived, the light in that hall did not feel cold. It felt earned. In an empire built on control, it was not power that changed the future. It was the choice to stand.